said, it's compatible with a lot of these religions, what they're trying to teach at the mystical level, which is the deepest level of these religions. And I can see why people are hesitant to accept these thoughts or even entertain them, because we have this negative connotation with nihilism, that there's no meaning to it. But I think that there's a certain beauty, as you were describing, in that, okay, well, there's no objective meaning, and maybe you don't have necessarily free will. However, you're under the illusion you do, and then you are also under the illusion that you can create your own meaning, which for the time being is sufficient.
I perfectly agree with what you say, and and I know there's a widely shared hesitance to praise, or many people fear nihilism. I think nihilism is one of the greatest achievements we have. Actually, I defend it. I think it. Firstly, it's plausible, but also I think the implications are such that they are in our interest, also from a moral perspective. So I distinguish two different types of nihilism. So there's aletheic nihilism. Aletheia means truth. So there's a nihilism concerning truth, and there's an ethical nihilism. And the aletheic, the nihilism concerning truth, is basically the perspectivism. I find highly plausible. Perspectivism meaning every philosophical judgment is an interpretation, whereby an interpretation doesn't mean that what is being said is false, but merely that it can be false, which basically means every philosophical judgment can be false. You cannot guarantee of the fundamental validity of any of the philosophical statements. That applies to your statements, but that applies to my statements, that applies to Nietzsche and Heraclitus as well. And if you start from such a stance, so nihilism here means that all the values we have, the norms we have, they are merely contingent nodal points. They are something which humans have created. They're based on human interests, maybe on human needs, but they're contingent.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think that the genealogy of morality is also Nietzsche's work that really describes what you're saying very well. And, he takes a deep dive into where do our morals come from. And as we see, when you really analyze it, it's subjective on the culture.
Exactly. He clearly analyzes what are the inclinations, what are the motives behind humans having created specific norms? Why are they interested in them? Why do Catholic priests have to cannot marry? Because once you're married, you can't give away, you can't keep secrets, and the believers need to come to you to give confessions, but you cannot hide the secrets you received from your wife. That's what sort of Nietzsche says, in order to analyze the underlying logic, why there is such a strength in the concept of the Catholic priest, and why the Catholic priest is seen as quasi such a very strong figure, because he cannot live manages to live without the pleasures, without the sensuality. That's quasi superhuman strength. And there's a psychological dynamics connected to it, why people look up to someone who has these capacities. And he tells a brilliant story, basically, how Christianity has developed on the basis from the slave morality in antiquity towards becoming the dominant morality in the Middle Ages. And then we've moved away from it during the Enlightenment process, at least in a specific form. I'm not saying, that that one has to abandon Christianity, but at least the way as it was presented during the Middle Ages, that's no longer a plausible way that we, atheists or witches need to be burned, and there's this rigid good and evil connection. That's no longer a plausible way of conceptualizing. Christianity, in the same way as it applies to any other kind of fundamentalist or radical approach, religious or non-religious approach, which is highly dangerous. And yes, and so the genealogy shows the motives and interests underlying the norms and values, and the same as the archaeology of Foucault. And I use the term pedigree of how the various pedigrees of norms and values have come about. And that means any kind of norm and any kind of value is a contingent nodal point, is something, it's a fiction. It's a fiction which is being created. And again, really, I'm really happy about my next book. And here it says, I'm presenting a fictive account of a fictive ethics of autonomy. So autonomy, I think autonomy is a wonderful achievement, but sort of what I'm defending is a liberal ethics of fictive autonomy. We cannot even conceptualize the notion even of autonomy. Autonomy can, on a metaphysical grounding, can only be conceptualized if you assume that we've got the immaterial soul which is connected to the body. That's wherein our autonomy lies, but that's no longer a plausible story. So, but on the other hand, in an ethical realm, I think it's affirming autonomy, that we as, it's my decision, and I have the right of morphological freedom, of educative freedom, of reproductive freedom. We need to leave the individuals decide and unfold their personal desires, drives, and needs. I think that's a wonderful achievement, that we can individually make these decisions. But so autonomy on an ethical perspective makes a lot of sense. But if we reflect upon what would be needed of having metaphysical autonomy, it's an absurd notion. So it is just something which we humans have created, but that doesn't mean we have to abandon it. That we can, I think, sort of the moral implications are such that we actually need to stick to certain fictions in order to have some structure in our lives. But these fictions might not be, they might not apply in 100 years' times and 200 years' times. So we always need to be open to get adapted to the new demands and the new needs, and maybe to new information. So there's not even to autonomy, which I find a wonderful achievement, but even such a concept is something which, given revised circumstance and further information, we need to adapt and revise. And it's this openness, if we embrace that that weaker stance, this openness towards other ethical perspectives, I think it also helps you to better live together with others without violently telling them, paternalistically telling, this is how you should live, and trying to have an openness to the other, obviously only as long as the others don't force you to live according to their fundamental understanding of how one should live one's life. So the freedom of someone is always limited by the freedom of someone else. And even though this is a fiction, I think it's a fiction, but I think it's a wonderful fiction. We live in that ethical nihilism, but I think so this ethical nihilism is a wonderful achievement, and we should even promote it much further. We should enable much more people to live according to their very own understandings of what it means to live.